If you're like me and you don't want to spend a bunch of money on your first camera, this is the video for you. Now, when I first went to buy a new camera, there actually weren't that many options out there. I bought my first camera in 2012, so yeah, there were definitely a few options out there, but there wasn't as many as there are today. You have so many options for so many different things, from what resolution I want my camera to shoot in to how many megapixels I want that thing to have. And there is so much information out there. It's kind of a little bit of sensory overload. Now, buying a camera under $1,000 isn't necessarily an easy thing to do nowadays. You have so much that goes into a camera, from lenses to SD cards to extra batteries, microphones. There is so much that you need to purchase, it seems like, if you want to get a camera nowadays, that being budget conscious is a very important thing. So today, I'm just gonna dumb it down for you. I'm gonna break everything down and I'm gonna give you the top 3 cameras I would buy for under $1,000 right now. At number 3 on the list is the Canon EOS M50. Now, this camera is last on my list because of a few bad things, but for the most part, it is a great camera. It's extremely easy to use. It's relatively beginner friendly, where someone can kind of just pick it up and figure it out. It has a really easy to use touchscreen, and it has a very fast autofocus. It shoots in 4K at 24 frames a second, and it has a 24.1 megapixel sensor, which means it's going to capture some pretty good looking photos. But compared to the other 2 cameras on this list, it has a little bit of a cheaper feel to it. It doesn't have as good of a battery life, and it's made primarily of plastic. This camera doesn't really have that big of a range for selecting a lens. This series in general just doesn't have a whole lot of different ones to choose from. You can get an adapter, but as adapters do, they will reduce the quality of the videos and photos that you are taking. When you are shooting videos in 4K, it has this weird 1.6 crop. So if you're using a 24mm lens, it's actually more like you're using a 38mm lens, which in some situations can be a good thing, but honestly, in most situations, it is not. And I'm sure it would get very frustrating after using it for some time. Number 2 on our list is the Sony A6100. It shoots 4K at 30 frames per second, and it has a 24.2 megapixel sensor. The Sony A series cameras have been some of my favorite cameras that I have ever used. And this camera in particular has great autofocus, it has an excellent battery life, and Sony has just such a wide array of lenses to choose from that it's kind of hard to go wrong with this camera. It does have a few problems. The touchscreen isn't as intuitive as you may like it, and it gets a little frustrating at times to use. It also doesn't have in-body stabilization, so when you are shooting, you have to be extremely still, or you just have to stabilize in post. And that brings us to number 1 on our list, the Fuji XS10. Now, this is probably my favorite camera on the list. It shoots 4K at 30 frames per second, and it has a 26.1 megapixel sensor, which is insane because compared to even full-frame Sony cameras, this thing is tiny. It has incredible in-body stabilization that can even rival, honestly, the A7 IV. It also just has very good specs, and it's just a very well-rounded camera. There's not many things that you could put up and try and make this camera do that it couldn't handle. And it's also just got a really good design, and maybe it sounds weird, but it's one of those things that it feels good in your hand. I will say the only bad thing about this camera is that there's no like real weatherproofing on it. It's not one of those cameras that you're gonna maybe bring to Iceland and get caught in a huge thunderstorm and just be like, probably keep shooting. It's one of those things where it's at that point you'd probably want to put that camera away. For me, like, I trust my A7 IV, A7 III, I trust those cameras in all weather. But something like this, I probably would feel way more comfortable if, that camera goes back in the bag when something like that happens. But like I said, it's an extremely well-rounded camera, and I think it's perfect for people just trying to get into photography, or they just want to do photography as kind of a side hobby, maybe shoot some videos here and there. I think it is the perfect camera for that type of stuff. And it's under $1,000, which for cameras these days is kind of hard to beat. So those are my camera recommendations to buy a camera for under $1,000. If you guys have any questions about lenses or memory cards or anything else, I have videos like that on my channel, so please feel free to check that out. If you have a question that I haven't answered in a video yet, feel free to leave a comment and I will either make a video about it or answer you down in the comments below. And with that, I will see you guys in the next video. Later.